Hello, and welcome back to episode 5 of the Mystic Space podcast. So, today we are going to be talking all about the ego. What is the ego? What does it do? What is an ego death? And is it a good or bad thing to have an ego? So, I'm sure if you're a part of the spiritual community, you would have heard something about an ego by now. Whether it was, how to control your ego, how to have an ego death, something about your ego's taking over, all of these things about ego. But what is your ego? And if you're not spiritual, I'm sure that you've still heard somebody say, like, oh, that person has a big ego. And, like, what do you usually mean when you say that somebody has a big ego? Like, when you perceive somebody to have a big ego, what do you mean? A lot of the times it can be mistaken for really, like, confident people. Obviously, there's a line that people go over and end up being, like, more cocky. And that is what people perceive as more egotistical. Or people who are typically more like self-centered and not really caring about other people, and they don't care about someone else, so they're like perceived as somebody who has a high ego. Well, the first thing I'd like to say to the spiritual community is, I'm sorry to break it to you, but you can't have an ego death. That does not exist. I personally don't think there's anything that you can do to rid yourself of your ego, because I think every single human being has an ego. I think it's a part of us, and it is something that we cannot just destroy or take out of us. I know that there has been so many people in the spiritual community that have talked about needing to have an ego death. And what does that mean? So there is this belief out there that you can have an ego death, which means that you basically kill the ego inside of you with doing a lot of shadow work or whatever it is that you do. Whenever you awaken or align yourself with your soul, whatever it is, people believe that you can rid yourself of your ego. And I think if we were to rid ourselves of our ego, we would rid ourselves of being human. I think the only time we ever remove ourselves from our ego is when we physically die and our soul moves past our physical body, because I believe that our ego is tied to this physical realm, to this 3D, to this body, to this mind. For me personally, I learnt to work with my ego, because at the start, when I first got into my spiritual journey, I did think that I could remove my ego. I did hear a lot about ego deaths and things like that, and I was like, oh yeah, if I can go do plant medicines and maybe go to like retreats and do all these things, and maybe like I'll finally rid myself of my ego and like I'll live this peaceful, happy life. And then I soon came to find that that's not possible, and that's not true. And those people are usually completely delulu. So what I did instead was learn to work with my ego. Now, one thing I would love to say is that I believe our ego is our mind. I believe our ego is actually our best friend in disguise, because I know a lot of people think that ego is a bad thing. Like if you're egotistical, you're bad, or having an ego is being bad. But I don't believe that the ego is necessarily good or bad. I think it's just a part of us, and depending on how we are, it's depending on how our ego is. I say that our ego is our mind and our brain because I see it as kind of like a machine. It's like a part of us that is just a machine that's inbuilt into the system, and it has been programmed a certain way, and it is there to keep us safe. That's one thing that I learned a lot about the ego, and that really resonated with me. And that's why I like to say that the ego is actually your best friend, because it will do whatever it can to keep you safe. It will be your biggest support in whatever it is that you choose to be. That's why I say it's so important to learn to work with your ego, because then you can start to learn to use it as your advantage instead of a disadvantage in your life. And I heard this quote, and I want to say that I think it was Alan Watts that said it, but don't quote me on that. The ego is a good servant, but a bad master. And I love that, because if you're overrun by your ego, if your ego is controlling you, it's a bad master, because it's steering you in the wrong direction in some cases, in most cases. Again, the ego is there to keep you safe. So the ego is not bad. It's not a bad thing at all. It actually is really a good thing, because we need our ego. The way I see it is kind of like the ego is our animal instincts, right? If we see a lion, our ego is going to go, okay, shit, we need to run, and it's going to kick off our adrenaline and all of that sort of stuff. That is our ego. It's like our monkey mind. It's like the monkey part of us that is just animal and not consciousness, if that makes sense. Because we're human, right? We're not just an animal. We're not just a cat and dog that's just constantly just reacting to its environment, right? We have a consciousness that's a little bit more aware and a little bit more above these other animals, but we are still a part of an animal, right? We still have an animal body, and therefore our animal body still has all of these things inside it. Our ego is something that has been programmed into us So let's just say we had a traumatic childhood and something in that gave us anxiety. That's actually your ego giving you anxiety because it's trying to keep you safe. So this traumatic thing happened and then you got anxiety. Now, anxiety actually stops you from going and doing that thing again so that you don't put yourself in another traumatic environment or situation again that will end up leaving you traumatized. That's why your ego is your best friend, because it will program your mind. It will help you protect yourself. It will help you not put yourself out there so that you don't get hurt. That is the ego. The ego says, no, I'm not going to get up on stage and make a fool of myself because this one time I did make a fool of myself and people laughed. The ego keeps you trapped in your mind because that's all it knows. It only knows how to work with your mind and how to keep you safe. So living from your ego or letting your ego overtake you is just living in a reaction versus a controlled response. It's just being an animal. It's just allowing yourself to be programmed by society, by everyone else around you, whatever happened, trauma, and it's just there to keep you safe. It doesn't know any different. It doesn't know any better. It's not doing anything bad or anything good. That's just based on our perception. Our ego doesn't know good and bad. Our ego knows, I need to keep you safe. So when you stop yourself from doing things like, say, going out into society because you have social anxiety, your ego is doing that for you because it is not allowing you to put yourself in what you deem as an unsafe situation. Because you've deemed socializing as an unsafe situation, your ego goes, I'm not going to put you in that. So I'm going to give you anxiety every time you think about it, every time you want to go do it. I'm going to give you anxiety so that you don't go do it. So it's up to you if you want to see that as a good or a bad thing. But I just see the ego as a really neutral thing. It's not good or bad. It's just something within us that keeps us safe. It just helps keep us alive, because keeping us safe is keeping us alive. And that's what it thinks it's doing. So it's stopping you from going to these social events because in its mind, it's thinking that this is going to keep you alive because this is much safer. So I'm going to keep you back instead of you going out there and having anxiety and being put in a situation where it might be dangerous because you've deemed it as dangerous because of a traumatic event or social programming or whatever it is. That's why I say that learning to unprogram your mind is so powerful, because you're learning to go through all these traumas, all these anxieties, all these things that have ever stopped you and whoever shaped you. And you are deciding who you want to be and how you want to be. Because once you understand that the only reason why we are the way we are is because of programming, then it becomes a lot easier to unprogram that and unlearn all of the shit that was put on us so that we can truly be who we want to be. So putting aside our ego takes us living from our heart space a lot more. If you want to try to not live from your ego as much and not allow your ego to be taking over you and now being a master of you, you have to learn to be a master of yourself. You have to learn to be a master of your mind. And doing that requires us to live a lot more in our heart space. What that means is living more in the present moment and getting out of our mind and getting out of our ego and being able to live from that heart space, being able to be present. Because when we're run by our ego, when we're living in our monkey mind so much, we're just doing, thinking. And we're not actually living. We're not actually being present. We're not actually just having our heart open and truly living this experience. This is why I feel like a lot of people feel so defeated in their life, whether it's with their mind and they hate how they think and they hate how they're so negative and they hate all these things about themselves, or whether it's they hate their life and their situation and what they're doing. A lot of it is because they're living too much in their monkey mind. They're living too much in their ego. They're staying safe, because stepping out of your comfort zone is fucking scary. Going and putting yourself out there is fucking scary. Going and chasing your dreams and going against a grain and going against what everyone else has said and said, oh, you might not be able to achieve this because it's really hard and no one ever gets to, and you going and doing it anyway, or you going and doing the things that you like to do, that is scary. And that means that you have to push beyond your ego to go do those things, because your ego is not going to want you to do that. Your ego is going to be like, no, I want you to stay here. I want you safe. I want you to stay at this job that you've been staying at for the last 10 years because it's safe. You know the job, you know the work, you know what you need to do. I need you to stay in this relationship even though you're unhappy because it's safe. It's easier than going out there and trying again. Whatever it is, your ego is trying to keep you safe. It's trying to keep you trapped. And that's not necessarily always a bad thing, but if you're unfulfilled and you're unhappy in your life, this is when usually your ego has taken over and you're not living very freely. You're not living in the present moment and you're not living very like open with the universe. It's like keeping a child locked inside for its whole life because you're afraid that it's going to run outside and graze its leg or try to climb a tree and fall and break its arm. You know what? That is a possibility. But is it fair to keep that child locked inside all its life because you're afraid of what could happen? Because that's what our ego does for us. It says, I'm not going to let you out there because you might fall and break your arm and I don't want you to do that. So I'm going to keep you in here and I'm going to give you anxiety every single time you think about going outside so that you stay in here and that you're safe. So what are some things that you can do to move through this and get out of that place where you're living from your monkey mind and you start living from a heart space instead? Well, it's not easy. And I'm not saying that you can just like snap your fingers and that's it. From tomorrow on, you've just like controlled your ego and now you're going to go live the best life ever. That definitely can happen. I do believe in transcendental or whatever that word is. I do believe in crazy transformative experiences that can change people like in the click of a finger, but that doesn't mean that there isn't always room to grow. Okay, there isn't like this one level that you'll achieve and that you'll reach and then you'll be like, yep, that's it, I've controlled my ego, I'm perfectly fine. This is like an ongoing thing. So the biggest thing to help you overcome being controlled by your ego is force yourself to go out of your comfort zone. You might need to start off small at first. Say if you have social anxiety, just start by making a phone call to someone random. Like, you know how you avoid making a phone call to order your food or whatever it is, make the phone call. Whatever it is to step you out of your comfort zone, you need to learn to do that more and more. So if you have social anxiety as an example, it's time to go out there and start pushing your comfort zone. That doesn't mean you need to go to a crowd with 300 people straight up and do a public speech, but let's just say you avoid the shopping center because of this. Start by going to the shopping center. You need to learn to teach your brain that it is not a dangerous situation, because the more you deem it as a dangerous situation, the more your brain and your ego is gonna keep you away from it. That's why I love the saying, do it anyway. Do it scared, do it anyway, because that's how you will push yourself. For me personally, I had really bad anxiety with planes and I love traveling. So I was like, I'm not going to let this stop me. And I pushed myself and I went on a crazy solo trip, by the way. 6 weeks in Costa Rica. I'm sure you guys know if you follow me on social media. And if you don't know, I'm from Australia. So to get to Costa Rica, it's basically like a 24-hour journey, which includes a 15-hour flight. And I'm very claustrophobic on planes. I feel very like constricted and I really don't like being on a plane because I just want fresh air. I want to be able to step out whenever I can. So that was really hard for me. And I didn't want to go because of that, because I was like, oh, I'm not going to be able to handle staying on a plane for 15 hours. But you know what? I did it anyway. I got on that plane, and even though I had anxiety initially and I was terrified, and throughout that plane, I was anxious, I did it anyway. And you know what? On the way back, I had no anxiety. I did a lot more work on myself while I was in Costa Rica to help that. But the more you do things that you are scared of doing, the better you'll become at doing it. You have to think of like a kid, right? Like when you first take a kid to like a park, right? They might be scared to go on the swing. They might be scared to go on the slide because it looks really big, right? And a lot of kids might not do this. I've had this with my nieces before where they're like, oh, I don't want to go on that. That's too big. And then once they actually do, they find out how fun it is. And then they want to go again and again and again. That's just the same thing with us. It's just that nobody was there to teach us the correct way to go, hey, you know what? You don't actually need to be afraid of this. And it's okay to be afraid of it, but it's also okay to do it anyway. It's like most kids are afraid of going on this really huge swing, but you know what? They do it anyway. And then they end up having so much fun and wanting to do it again and again. So it's like the same thing with us. We just have to teach ourselves and tell ourselves that that thing is not scary, because there's something in our brain, there's some neurological wire that connected and said, going outside to a shopping center is scary, or it's overwhelming, or whatever it is. So you need to reparent yourself. You need to tell yourself that no, it's not scary. Nothing's going to happen. Nothing bad is going to happen. So if you want to learn to control your ego more, you have to learn how to talk to your ego, learn how to talk to yourself, reparent yourself and tell yourself that you're not afraid of these things and that there's nothing to be afraid of. And there are so many things that can help you do this and help you move through this. Obviously, the best way to do it is when things come up in that moment. Like when you feel that anxiety come up or whatever it is that comes up in that moment, that's the best time to do your quote unquote shadow work. But obviously, there is an array of things that you can do outside of that, because sometimes when those emotions come up at that time, if you haven't learned how to control your mind, if you haven't learned to control yourself and be able to relax your mind and relax your body and, observe your thoughts and not get consumed by your thoughts for when these things do come up, then it might be a lot harder for you to navigate through it when it does come up in the moment. So there's a lot of things that you can do outside of that to help you. One of the main things I'm going to say, and I always preach about this, is meditation. Meditation is one of the best forms because it helps you so much with mindfulness. It helps you so much detach from your thoughts so that you're not so attached to them, because a lot of the times that's what our problem is, right? Like we think like our thoughts are real. Like, we have an anxious thought or we have an intrusive thought and we think that's real. Like, oh my God, I'm actually going to die if I get on this plane. But that's not reality. But if you haven't learned to be able to calm your mind, then when you get that anxious thought of, oh my God, I'm going to die on the plane, it's not going to be easy for you to calm yourself down. That's why I feel like meditation is great, because it teaches you to calm yourself down more and more. And the more you do it, the easier it is. And there's lots of forms of meditation. And I speak about this on all my platforms. And I will be doing a podcast episode purely on meditation, because a lot of people have so many questions about meditation and struggle with meditation. But just remember not to overcomplicate it. Okay, just sit down, relax, observe your thoughts. That's pretty much the basis of it. Another thing you can do is plant medicine. Now, obviously, I am not ever going to sit here and tell anybody to do plant medicine, because I'm not a doctor and you know yourself, and plant medicine is not something to like fuck around and find out with, because it's really powerful shit. And you guys probably know, if you know me and you follow me on social media, that I'm a huge plant medicine advocate. I love plant medicine. It's helped me a lot on my journey. It's helped me with my mental health, my physical health. And you don't need to take plant medicine on this journey at all. I'm not saying that you do. For me, plant medicine is kind of like a fast track, and that can actually be very dangerous for some people. That's why I say it's not something that I like preach to recommend to everybody, like, oh yes, everybody should be taking shrooms, or everybody should be smoking weed, or everybody should be doing ayahuasca, or whatever it is, because I don't think you need all of these things. And fast tracking them can sometimes be dangerous if you're not ready for it. Sometimes it can be very dangerous because you're not grounded enough and you're not really ready to take on all this information and look deep within yourself. Plant medicine can really, really, really spike a lot of spiritual awakening and a lot of deep thoughts. And not everyone's ready for that. But plant medicine helps with your ego a lot, because when you are taking plant medicine, you are completely in the present moment. You are completely operating from your heart and not from your mind. It's almost like your mind disappears, like your ego dissolves in that moment when you are on plant medicine. It's like a beautiful thing that just allows you to take away that veil and just really live from the heart. Just really actually live. Plant medicine is great because it stops the monkey mind from overthinking and overanalyzing, and it stops us from living in our monkey mind so much. So stop living from our brain and our head so much, and be able to drop down and live from our heart spaces more. And honestly, one of the most amazing things that you can do as well for your ego is to just play, just enjoy life. And I know that sounds really simple and probably very hard for a lot of people. A lot of people who are living very in their head are probably too stressed to even think about enjoying life, or maybe that's reserved for only the weekends, and even then you're probably cleaning and doing all these other things. You're not actually truly relaxing, and so the only time you actually do feel like you relax is when you get to go on a holiday. But relaxing is great because it slows down your nervous system, and when you slow down your nervous system, you're living more in the present moment. You're living more from your heart space. When you're living more in the present moment, there's not as much room for your mind. There's not as much room to live from your head, where all these anxieties and thoughts about the potential future and all these negative thoughts and all this shit from the past come up. When you're living in the present moment, you're not thinking. You're not thinking about the past and you're not thinking about the future. You're just being present. So whatever it is that you like to do that helps you feel like you're actually enjoying life, whether that's being creative, painting, dancing, going and playing in the park, literally going and laying down, going to the beach, swimming, whatever it is that makes you feel like this is the life. Like, you're just really submerged in that present moment and you're enjoying life. The more you do that, the better it is, because your ego doesn't operate in those times. Your ego isn't running you in those times. You're running it because you're in control of yourself and you're in control by being in the present moment. The more you learn to be in the present moment, the easier it is to control these things. The easier it is to recognize and observe what the ego is. The easier it is to observe the thoughts that come up that end up leading to certain emotions like anxiety and things like that. Journaling and breath work is also great because, again, you're being in the present moment. It's something where you're just being submerged in that moment, and that is really powerful. And the more and more you do that, you will see how easier it will become to stay in that present moment and to be more of the observer rather than like a person that's just reacting to its environment constantly. The more you do it, the more you'll understand and be able to take a step back, almost pull yourself back, like you're almost observing yourself from a bird's eye view and realizing that that's the true you. That up there is the consciousness that is you. And down below is just this meat suit that has all of these components in it. And it has thoughts and it has emotions and it has all these things, but they all come and go. And that does not mean that it is a part of who you are. And the more you're able to observe that and kind of take a step back and detach yourself from it, the easier it is to stop being run by your ego, because your ego has no power then. You're taking the power away from the ego and you're empowering yourself. You're empowering yourself to remember that you actually have control and you don't have to be this animal that is just reacting constantly to its environment and constantly reacting to the way it's been programmed and conditioned by society and other people. The more you realize that you have a choice on how you choose to be and how you choose to respond. And once you learn to work with your ego, it's so beautiful and so empowering to feel that way. It's so fucking empowering to feel like I finally have control over my life, and that's something that I have felt. And I'm telling you, that is honestly one of the best feelings, because I finally felt like I wasn't a product of my environment. I finally felt like, you know what, I don't have to react to everything anymore, and I was able to observe and respond and choose how I wanted to respond. Now, that doesn't mean that the ego still doesn't come up, like that I've just pushed to the side and it doesn't ever come up. No way. Of course, the ego still comes up all the time. But the amazing thing is, when you empower yourself, you're able to observe that and realize, you know what, that's my ego. Okay, cool. So what do I need to do to push through that? What do I need to do what is still in alignment with me? Because that's what the ego will do. Because like I said, the ego is keeping you safe, right? If you want to go start a business, or if you want to become a content creator, or whatever it is that you want to do, and you have to push yourself out of your limits, your ego is not going to help you with that unless you've learned how to work with your ego. Because your ego is going to want to keep you safe, and your ego is going to say, don't do that because what if it fails? Don't do that because what if this? What if that? And I think that's another misconception, that you're very selfish if you're very egotistical, and like selfish is a bad thing. I'm here to tell you that being selfish is not a bad thing. Be selfish. You deserve to be selfish. You deserve to do the things that make you happy. You deserve to do the things that fulfill you. You deserve to chase your dreams, and you don't have to let your ego hold you back anymore. And this might be why some people have associated doing that with an ego death, because they finally learn how to control their ego rather than being run by their ego. But just remember that your ego is a part of you. It's not a bad thing. It's there, but you can definitely make it work for you rather than it working you. Make it be your servant rather than your master. And you can finally stop letting your ego run your life, so that you can live a more fulfilled life, and that you can go do the things that make you happy and the things that you want to do in life. Anyway, I think there's a lot of depth to the ego, because I think, again, it's our brain, it's our trauma, it's all our responses. It's literally our neurological pathways in our brain. I think that all contributes to our ego. And I can tell you that for me personally, learning to let go of my ego in that sense and not let it run me and overtake my life has been so amazing and so transformative. And I have felt my life get so much better because I feel like I'm in control. And that's really fucking powerful. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Mystic Space Podcast talking about the ego, and I will see you guys in my next episode. Blessings. Mwah.